He was being prepped by Hope Hicks and the comms team to say that the DOJ had come up with this memo so that they could justify the firing of Comey.
So were you in that position too?
I mean, you were not. That was definitely Hope Hicks, press secretary kind of thing, but I was really, really surprised that he would implicate himself. That's when you know someone is mentally challenged, when they would even jeopardize their own livelihood by saying things that are just insane at times.
So if the comms team prepped the president to lie to Lester Holt...
They prep him to lie every day.
What? We got to get to some more. Harry, what? They prep him to lie every day? Hope Hicks prepped him to tell a lie? What was that?
Oh, my God.
Yeah. I mean, she was a White House staffer. Is she saying that she saw the White House team prep him? Isn't he being investigated for potentially obstructing justice? I mean, I don't know. This is like staring at the mirrors of the mirrors and the reflections of the funhouse reflections, but that didn't seem like a very smart thing to say if you want to stay out. Some people want to get involved in a special counsel investigation. I've actually seen a little bit of that. But she basically came out and accused the press and comms officials of prepping the president to lie. Have you ever heard that before?
Right. Well, I mean, boy, is this getting down in the muck. I think you're exactly right. She said, "Oh, please, Bob Mueller, come and interview me." But of course, maybe that is what she wants. But yeah, she's really throwing around stuff and making, suggesting that she has tapes and that the whole MO of the White House is about lying. Of course, we have daily lies coming from the White House. The staff must know it, and they must in some way make some allowance for their less than forthright commander-in-chief.
Right, maybe it bought her a little bit of credibility. It's part of the all-out war today between the White House and former staffer/apprentice contestant Omarosa. She's out for blood ahead of the release of her book, Unhinged. And as part of her publicity tour, she's releasing secret audio recordings she made at the tail end of her White House tenure. Here's part of one of those tapes, John Kelly firing her in the Situation Room.
But I think it's important to understand that if we make this a friendly departure, we can all be, you can look at your time here in the White House as a year of service to the nation, and then you can go on without any type of difficulty in the future relative to your reputation.
And Omarosa released another recording earlier today, this one of a phone call between herself and the president shortly after her firing.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw in the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
No, nobody even told me about it. Nobody.
Wow.
They run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn it. I don't love you leaving at all.
It's so big. I'm busy tweeting and watching TV. I don't have any idea what's going on. Now, NBC News has not been able to listen to the full recording to know what was said before or after what we just heard. Joining us now from the Washington Post, White House reporter Ashley Parker, and joining Jason and me at the table, the Rev Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC, and Bret Stephens, New York Times op-ed columnist. Harry Litman is still here, obviously. Ashley Parker, you made me laugh for hours after the show Friday with your Munch, which was the excerpt from Omarosa's book about the president allegedly chewing a piece of paper. Omarosa says yes. Michael Cohen says no. Trump tweeted Michael Cohen, who may have already or be in the process of flipping on him. So this whole story makes for strange bedfellows. But what do you make of today's rollout of the Omarosa-Trump experience?
Well, it's just, again, I think at the outset it's worth remembering that the problem here is that I think the other day you put it as kind of two tarantulas fighting, but nobody has any credibility. Omarosa does not have a ton of credibility, although, again, she does have these recordings, which my colleague Josh Dawsey has listened to some of them, and they do back up some of the quotes in her book. She was able to produce that non-disclosure form that the campaign center for $15,000 a month in basically hush money. The White House also has no credibility because they have a record of lying and being mistruthful. And they allowed, as the president himself kind of said today, Omarosa, someone who, by all accounts, and this was something I was hearing, I'm sure you were hearing in real time, was getting quite poor reviews by just about everyone in the White House, to stay in that White House, basically because, again, as Trump tweeted, she was saying nice things about him.
And here was the president's response. He said in response to a question from Maggie Haberman this week, I think that she was a lowlife, and he tweeted this: wacky Omarosa. Who else did he call wacky? I feel like that's a retread. It's a retread, Mr. President. Wacky Omarosa, who got fired 3 times on The Apprentice. Like that. Then why'd he hire her? Ay. Now got fired for the last time. I doubt that. She never made it, never will. She begged me for a job, tears in her eyes. I said, okay. This is like a play. I said, okay. People in the White House hated her. She was vicious, but not smart. I don't know if I can read the rest of this. I would rarely see her, but heard really bad things. Nasty to people, and would constantly miss meetings and work. When General Kelly came on board, he told me she was a loser and nothing but problems. I told him to try working it out if possible, because she only said great things about me. Is this real? Control room, is this real? Okay, this is real. While I know it's not presidential to take on a lowlife like Omarosa, well, I would rather not be doing so. This is a modern-day form of communication, and I know the fake news media will be working overtime to make even wacky Omarosa look legitimate as possible. Well, so here's the problem, Reb. He made Omarosa look legitimate as possible, not us, by hiring her and putting her on the White House.
Well, you have to look at the whole context of, first
I'm putting
of all,
this on my wall. This is unbelievable. This is our president.
Is. But I think you've got to look at the fact. Look at who he has in the White House. Omarosa, who I disagreed with vehemently, I think she put it in the book, about going with Trump, used to work in the White House before she worked in The Apprentice. So if you're comparing her credibility to others that he brought in the White House, she's probably a little more credible in terms of White House background than them. It was a low-level position. But you're talking about Bannon, who was an anarchist. I mean, look at the guys that we have listened to about with this White House. Thing I would question when she says they prepped him to lie, those of us in New York that know Donald Trump knows no one has to prep him to lie. They might have had to prep him on which lie. But I think that what is really not being discussed here, what was her job? And her basic job was to be a liaison to reach out to the black community. It was not like she had to get in line to get that job and that he was choosing her over others. It was a job very few people wanted.
Right.
It's a job she did try to do, and many of us gave her a very difficult time because she tried to get me to meet with him and others, and we wouldn't. So, and who has she been replaced with? Kellyanne Conway can't even think of the name who's even in the White House. So as much as all of us look at Omarosa with some disdain, we have to look at she's in a position that was not a position that anyone really wanted to be in, and she tried to make it work because, like he said, she spoke highly of him.
Yeah, the larger question about Omarosa isn't how she left the White House. It's how she got into the White House to begin with. I mean, that's really what we ought to be.
But I mean, why are his kids there? I mean, that question goes over everybody.
I mean,
why is Hope Hicks there?
That's exactly why is Jared Kushner running Middle East policy and so on. I have a counterintuitive theory, which is that Omarosa is actually continuing to serve the president's purposes with this book because there is only one person, maybe other than Rudy Giuliani, who has less credibility than the president. So for someone with that little credibility then to attack the president somewhat enhances his standing. It creates the soap opera type of dramas, the play, as you said, on which Trump thrives. If she becomes a witness for Mueller, she's a tainted witness. She's a dubious witness. So all of this, in a sense, serves, in a kind of meta sense, serves the president's purposes of creating a soap opera-like distraction from what really ought to be concerning us, which is the state of the country and America's relationship with the rest of the world.
Yeah, we know Trump doesn't care about that. I mean, what I find so intriguing about her recording with Kelly isn't that she recorded it. I mean, that's people have been. Of course, you don't take phones into the sit room. No one does. Obviously, they do, but they seem to do everything other than roller.
You don't fire anybody in the sit room. I mean, why would they in the sit room?
That's what I was going to say.
Yes.
You don't go to the sit room for just some person personnel meeting. The chief of staff, one, has the biggest office in the West Wing. I think other than the vice president's office, it might be about the same size. The biggest seating area, the biggest conference table is in the chief of staff's room because they have the most amount of staff meetings in the chief of staff's office. Right. Also, in a normal White House, where North Korea represents an existential threat to this country, where Iran is, where you've ripped up the Iran deal, the sit room is a busy place.
Yes.
And the president's there, and the national security. No one was in the sit room because it was open for John Kelly to go down there with Omarosa to fire her.
Yeah.
That, to me, is the most stunning thing about Kelly firing Omarosa in the sit room.
And the idea that, like, it's almost like he was flexing, like, I'm going to take you here. I'm going to take you to the principal.
I'm going to take you down to the dungeon,
and then I'm going to fire you, and then everyone's going to be intimidated. I mean, it's this kind of petty, venal nonsense. This high school slam book tweet that Trump sends out, that's the other thing, and Bret and I have talked about, that's the other thing that concerns me. This is, even when we go to the FBI or this White House, this is why we can't get the best people. Because when you leave this White House, you're personally attacked by this president. They try and push you out of your job. They try and destroy anything you've accomplished. I've had just as many disagreements with Omarosa. I was on a panel with her at NABJ last year. It was a big old mess. I asked her directly, what's your job? Like, she's gotten a lot of criticism. But in this particular instance, with the way this White House has treated her since she's left, she's right. But she is one of many people who have left this White House and have been attacked unfairly and unreasonably because it doesn't run like an office. It doesn't run like the government. It runs like the personal fiefdom of the President of the United States.
Ashley, let me get you on the substance of her really central critique of Donald Trump. It's that he's mentally unfit. That is something I've only heard. David Brooks wrote a piece many months ago quoting some unnamed Republican senators who thought that Donald Trump sounded like someone in early stage Alzheimer's because of the pace with which he repeated himself. But you don't hear a lot of this. People that know him have sort of speculated, but it's dangerous business to be diagnosing somebody on television, which is why we don't do it. But when people who see him in and out of the White House raise these kind of questions about fitness, it reminds me of the Ronnie Jackson chapter of this Never Dull Presidency, where he stood out and sort of held up a mental exam given in the early stages of diagnosing any sort of dementia or anything. And we all know what happened to Ronnie Jackson. He didn't last very long. So what is the reaction inside the president's inner circle to someone who saw him and has known him for a long time, really pointing out and making some pretty sharp critiques about a decline in the president's mental sharpness?
You're right. I mean, it is dangerous for anyone other than the president's doctor who has actually done a real physical, rigorous, thorough physical examination.
Which we don't know Ronnie Jackson did, to be fair.
Correct. To make any of these claims. So I don't think anyone in the president's inner circle is treating this from Omarosa, who's not a medical doctor and who is certainly in this moment on the outs with the White House as, you know, as a damaging medical diagnosis. They're basically incredibly frustrated with her. And I have to say, with the exception of the president, most of these people who are now coming public with their criticisms about her were just as scathing in private. She's someone who was not particularly well liked in that White House, other than for a time being protected by the president from just about the day she got in there. So they're frustrated, and they're also, again, we know excerpts and bits and pieces of the book. We don't know all the recordings. The book isn't entirely out yet. Some people they're mad at her. They're frustrated with her. They know it's a PR nightmare, in part because they don't have much credibility. And they're worried about themselves. You know, what did she maybe record of them? What does she maybe write about them? As always with this White House, there's often an element of self-interest and self-preservation.
A little in-house money penny with all her recording devices. I want to play the clip, though, you mentioned Kellyanne Conway talking about White House staffers. And behind me, it's raining in Washington. But let's watch Kellyanne.
Kellyanne, the Omarosa was the most prominent high-level African-American serving in the West Wing on President Trump's staff. Who now is that person? Who is the most prominent high-level advisor to the president on the West Wing staff right now?
African-American?
Yes.
I would say that, well, first of all, you're totally not covering the fact that our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and world-renowned
I'm asking you about the White House staff. I'm asking you about the people the president is with every day.
Well, the president works with Secretary Carson every day. He's trying to break the back of the scourge
who
of
there is
on
the White House staff right now?
And we have Jerron, who's done a fabulous job and he's been very involved with Jared Kushner and President Trump on prison reform at the beginning. He's been there from the beginning. He worked with Omarosa and others of us.
Does he have an office in the West Wing, Kelly?
He has an office in the EOP, absolutely. The Executive Office of the President, yes.
But not in the West Wing.
Ron, if you have a last name, you're invited to come tell us what you do and where you sit. I wanted to send her a lifeline. That was the saddest thing I've ever seen.
But that's my point. I think that we can go through the Donald Trump Omarosa tabloid side. The fact is, on the anniversary of Charlottesville, for them to sit on national television and not be able to name a black in the West Wing, and for the president to say his thoughts about black Americans, his liaison was somebody wacky
and
who didn't know what they were doing, and a lowlife, but I hired her to be your liaison because she said nice things. Do you know how insulting that should be to Americans? His point, how did she get there in the first place? Either you thought she was credible, or either you were saying, we don't matter, I'm going to have a wacky lowlife handle y'all. You can't have it both ways, and it's confirmed by Kellyanne. While all of us were in Charlottesville yesterday, couldn't even come up with a black name on the West Wing. I think that's what we ought to be really dealing with, rather than all this comical stuff.
So we did actually find Jerron. Like we found him. He does have a position. He does some sort of calm stuff.
I believe he does, but she couldn't think of his last name.
Yeah, but she couldn't think of him. And even when he mentioned African American, she was like like she didn't know what the concept was. Like there's black people in this country. You know, but I think ultimately I agree with Red. But it's also this idea. This is the perpetual hostility that we see from this administration when it comes to any discussions of race. When we have an anniversary of a terrorist attack on a college town, and the president is more hostile and more prolific and talking about professional athletes than he is to terrorists who are marching in Lafayette Square right outside of the White House. That's what makes this a dangerous and problematic administration.
All right, Harry Litman, did you want a quick last word? Go ahead, Harry.
African-American stupid. One more African-American calling not smart. That one of a series. I'm sorry,
That's
go
right.
ahead.
No, you're right. Frederica Wilson, Maxine Waters. LeBron James. Not nice to Steph Curry. Yeah. Ooh. And now Omarosa. Harry Litman, thank you for spending so much of the hour with us. We're grateful. When we come back, a stunning snub from the president this afternoon. It's blowing up right now on social media. We'll tell you.